Well, one of the new seven wonders of the world could be losing its title. Machu Picchu, of course, located in Peru, was named one of the new wonders of the world back in 2007.
For 600 years, nobody dared look beneath Machu Picchu. Then scientists did. And what they found down there has never fully been made public. Ancient structures nobody knew existed, a geological secret that should have been impossible.
So why is Machu Picchu at risk right now of kind of losing this title and credibility as one of the new seven wonders of the world? Set it up for us.
Well, it's been a cumulative thing, Teddy. The fact is that these places are, of course, wonders for all of us, whether they're voted or not. But these are voted. They are chosen, as you rightly said, by over 100 million votes. And Machu Picchu has to honor that. And recently, the situation has been terrible.
Human remains that raise questions the Peruvian government refuses to answer. Researchers who spent years uncovering the truth watched in disbelief as officials responded with complete silence. Then, weeks later, came a decision so suspicious that it stopped the entire scientific community cold. Something is buried beneath that mountain, and someone does not want it found. Machu Picchu has been standing on a ridge in the Peruvian Andes for roughly 600 years. Millions of people have visited it, photographed it, and read about it. It is one of the most studied archaeological sites on the planet. And yet between 2023 and 2025, a series of scientific investigations produced findings that forced researchers to reconsider almost everything they thought. They knew about the place. The discoveries did not come from one team or one discipline. They came from geneticists, remote sensing specialists, geologists and engineers, all working separately and all arriving at conclusions that pointed in the same direction. Machu Picchu is significantly older, larger, more complex, and more deliberately engineered than the mainstream account had ever suggested. The first major finding came out of a genetics laboratory at Yale University. A bioarchaeologist named Dr. Lucy Salazar and geneticist Dr. Richard Berger had spent months extracting and sequencing DNA from 34 individuals whose remains were found buried within the walls of Machu Picchu. These were not random bones scattered across the site. They were carefully placed burials, positioned in deliberate locations throughout the citadel, suggesting that whoever interred them had a specific reason for putting them exactly where they were found. The working assumption going into the study was straightforward. Most scholars had long accepted that Machu Picchu was a royal estate built for the Inca Emperor Pachacuti, a private retreat for the most powerful figure in South America at the height of the Inca Empire. The DNA analysis was expected to confirm that the people buried there were connected to Inca highland populations, which would be entirely consistent with that theory. The results did not confirm anything of the sort. The genetic diversity found across those 34 individuals was, according to Berger's own description of the findings, unlike anything the team had anticipated. The profiles did not align with standard Inca highland populations. Instead, they revealed people from a wide range of ethnic backgrounds, different regions, different linguistic groups, all buried together in one place. Some carried genetic markers associated with coastal populations living hundreds of miles to the west. Others traced back to groups from far to the north. The picture that emerged from the data looked nothing like a royal retreat reserved for a single ruling class. It looked like a hub, a place where people from across an entire empire had been deliberately brought together. Among those 34 individuals, Salazar identified 6 women whose DNA traced not to the Andes at all, but to the Amazon rainforest. Lowland jungle populations, living near sea level in dense tropical forest, had somehow ended up buried at an altitude of 2,440 meters in a mountain citadel. The physical distance between the Amazon basin and Machu Picchu is one thing, but the terrain between them is another matter entirely. To make that journey, a person would travel through suffocating heat and humidity at low elevation, then climb through cloud forest and over mountain passes where trails narrow to barely a shoulder's width, where temperatures can drop by 40 degrees within a single day, and where the altitude alone is enough to push an unprepared body to its limits. Modern hikers equipped with GPS devices and high-performance gear have died on comparable routes. That these women made the journey or were transported along it 5 centuries ago is not a minor detail. One particular pair stopped the research team in its tracks. A mother and daughter buried close to one another, whose bone chemistry told 2 entirely different life stories. Isotope analysis, which reads dietary and environmental signatures locked into human remains, showed that the two women had grown up in different places, eating different foods, drinking from different water sources. They had lived separately in different parts of the world and then ended up together in death at the same high-altitude site. Salazar spent considerable time with those results before drawing any conclusions, but the conclusion was difficult to avoid. This was not the result of ordinary migration or chance. Someone had organized the movement of these people across enormous distances, someone with the authority and the logistical means to treat human beings as components of a larger plan. While the genetics work was still being processed, a separate team led by researcher Ari Karamanica was conducting a very different kind of investigation. In 2024, Karamanica and a group of remote sensing specialists flew LiDAR-equipped drones over sections of the land surrounding Machu Picchu that tourists never access. LiDAR works by firing millions of laser pulses at the ground and using the returning signals to build precise, three-dimensional maps of whatever lies beneath vegetation, soil, and shallow rock. It removes the visual noise of jungle cover and reveals the shapes of structures that would otherwise be completely invisible to the human eye. The drones swept across forested slopes bordering the famous terraces and temples, areas that had been classified for decades as natural wilderness, unremarkable jungle framing a known site. What appeared on Karamanica's screens were 12 previously unknown buildings and platforms hidden beneath centuries of vegetation growth. These structures had never appeared on any map, any survey, or any archaeological record in 500 years of exploration. Some showed characteristics consistent with ceremonial platforms. Others appeared residential or administrative in nature. They were simply there, had always been there, and nobody had found them. Adding another layer to the picture, a geologist named Dr. Raldo Menegat at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil was analyzing satellite imagery when he identified something in the geological data beneath Machu Picchu that he reportedly had to verify 3 times before accepting. 2 major fault lines, each stretching approximately 175 kilometers, intersect almost directly beneath the citadel. Not near it, not in the general vicinity, but under it, crossing at a point that sits almost exactly beneath the main temple complex. Fault lines typically raise immediate concerns about instability and seismic risk. But when Menegat's team ran computer simulations covering more than 1,000 earthquake scenarios across a range of magnitudes and directions, the results were consistent and entirely unexpected. Every simulation produced the same outcome. The intersection point of those 2 fault lines is extraordinarily stable. The opposing tectonic forces effectively cancel each other out, creating a geological zone where ground movement during seismic events is minimal. The Inca had built their most sacred site on the single most earthquake-resistant point in the entire region, a point that required orbiting satellites and modern computational modeling to identify in the 21st century. Cusco, the Inca capital, has been devastated by earthquakes on multiple occasions throughout history. Machu Picchu has not suffered significant structural damage from seismic activity in 500 years. The precision does not stop at the surface or below it. Separate engineering studies have established that what tourists photograph at Machu Picchu, the terraces, the temples, the stone plazas, represents only about 40% of the actual construction. Roughly 60% of the site exists underground. Excavation teams working 9 feet beneath the visible terraces found an elaborate subterranean infrastructure, drainage channels, retaining walls, foundation networks, and water systems carved from stone, all functioning as an integrated whole. The drainage system alone channels rainfall from the highest point of the site through stone-lined conduits, redistributes it across dozens of terraces, filters it through layers of carefully graded gravel, and expels it at the base of the mountain in controlled streams. There has been no pooling, no significant erosion, and no structural failure in 500 years, through monsoon seasons and seismic activity alike, all achieved without iron tools, without wheels, and without mortar between the fitted stones. Engineers who have studied the system have described it as comparable to, and in some respects more effective than, modern urban stormwater management infrastructure. At the highest point of the site stands a carved granite structure known as the Intihuatana. It had long been treated as a ceremonial object, interesting but not technically functional. When researchers measured it precisely using GPS satellite data, they found that it is aligned to within 3 degrees of true geographic north, not magnetic north, which shifts over time, but the actual rotational pole of the planet. The stone functions as a solar calendar, marking solstices and equinoxes to within 15 minutes of accuracy. It has required no adjustment or maintenance of any kind across the centuries. The level of astronomical precision embedded in a single piece of hand-carved granite matches standards applied today in modern satellite calibration work. Taken together, these findings describe a site that is far more than a royal estate or a ceremonial retreat. They describe a deliberately constructed, astronomically aligned, geologically selected, and underground engineered complex, populated by a genetically diverse group of people drawn from across an entire empire with a level of technical knowledge that current science is only beginning to measure accurately. For a brief period at the start of 2026, it appeared that the Peruvian government was moving in the direction that scientists and conservationists had been pushing for years. In January of that year, Peru's Ministry of Culture formally approved a master plan for the protection and management of Machu Picchu. The plan set out conservation guidelines, visitor management frameworks, and preservation goals stretching all the way to 2046. On paper, it represented exactly the kind of long-term, carefully considered commitment to the site that researchers had been requesting for years, particularly in light of the recent discoveries that had demonstrated just how much of Machu Picchu remained unstudied and how vulnerable its underground systems were to increased human activity. Scientists welcomed it. Conservationists noted it. The document existed, it was signed, and it carried the weight of official government policy. 3 weeks later, the Peruvian government approved the construction of the Chinchero International Airport. The two decisions are difficult to reconcile when placed side by side. A 20-year protection framework on one hand, and on the other, the approval of an infrastructure project that independent assessments had repeatedly concluded the surrounding region cannot sustainably support. The airport, located in the town of Chinchero in the Sacred Valley, had been designed with a projected annual capacity of approximately 8 million visitors. Current visitor numbers to Machu Picchu sit at roughly 1.5 million per year. The airport, once operational, would funnel a volume of tourists into the valley that represents an increase of around 200% above existing. Levels directed into a region whose water systems, road networks, waste management infrastructure, and archaeological preservation capacity are already operating under significant strain. The Chinchero Airport is not a new idea. The project had been in discussion for years before it was formally shelved following a major corruption scandal. Brazilian construction company Odebrecht, which had been awarded contracts connected to the project, was implicated in one of the largest bribery investigations in Latin American history. The scandal reached across 12 countries, toppled governments, sent officials to prison, and froze billions of dollars in infrastructure contracts. The Chinchero Airport was caught in that wreckage, and the project effectively went dormant. For roughly 15 years, it sat inactive, entangled in legal proceedings and political fallout, while the site it was intended to serve continued to be studied, debated, and increasingly understood as something far more significant and far more fragile than previously recognized. In early 2026, the project did not simply return. It was fast-tracked. The target for operational readiness was set at late 2027, meaning the government had set itself a window of approximately 18 months from approval to the first commercial flight's landing. For a major international airport serving a UNESCO World Heritage Site in a region with known infrastructure limitations and active archaeological sensitivities, that is an exceptionally compressed timeline. The speed of the process attracted attention almost immediately, not because airports cannot be built quickly under the right conditions, but because of what had been approved before a critical piece of information was even available. The official capacity study, the formal government-commissioned report that would determine whether the Sacred Valley can sustainably handle 8 million visitors per year, was not scheduled for completion until September 2026. That date falls 7 months after the airport was approved. The infrastructure that the study was designed to evaluate had already been given the green light before the study existed. Independent researchers and conservation groups pointed this out clearly and directly. The sequence of events meant that a decision with permanent, large-scale consequences for one of the most significant archaeological sites in the world had been made without the data that should have informed it. The report, when it eventually arrives, will produce findings that virtually every existing independent assessment has already anticipated. The Sacred Valley's water systems, road capacity, waste infrastructure, and archaeological management resources do not scale to accommodate 8 million annual visitors. That conclusion is not speculative. It is the consistent outcome of every serious independent evaluation that has been conducted on the question. What makes the situation more complicated is where the runway is being built. The construction at Chinchero is not taking place on empty or previously disturbed land. The runway is being laid directly over agricultural terraces that are approximately 600 years old. These are not ruins in the conventional sense, structures that have collapsed or degraded into rubble over the centuries. They are functioning terraces. The irrigation systems built into them still operate, the drainage still performs, the underlying structure still holds. They are, in every practical sense, a working example of the same engineering tradition that constructed the underground infrastructure at Machu Picchu itself. The same principles, the same techniques, the same approach to water management and structural stability that has kept Machu Picchu standing and functional through half a millennium of monsoons and earthquakes. Once those terraces at Chinchero are gone, the opportunity to study them as a living record of Inca engineering practice is gone permanently. There is no version of that loss that is recoverable. The scientific community has been vocal about what the airport project means for the broader region. Dr. Salazar, whose DNA research had already reshaped the understanding of who Machu Picchu was built for and why, was among those who raised concerns. Researchers affiliated with Cambridge University and Japanese archaeological institutions also published assessments outlining the specific measurable threats that mass tourism at this scale poses to the underground infrastructure at Machu Picchu. The foot traffic alone generates vibration and ground compression. Increased human presence raises moisture levels. Construction activity in the valley produces further ground disturbance. The drainage and foundation systems that have functioned without intervention for 500 years were not designed to operate under those conditions. The concern is not hypothetical. It is grounded in the same engineering data that established how precisely those systems were built and how sensitive they are to the environmental conditions around them. The Peruvian government's response to these published concerns has been consistent. There has been no formal rebuttal of the research, no engagement with the specific data points raised, no public counter-argument addressing the findings on their own terms. The response has been silence. The same silence that followed the publication of the DNA findings. The same silence that came after the LiDAR mapping identified 12 unknown structures in restricted zones. The same silence that met the geological modeling which showed Machu Picchu was built on a precise fault line intersection. Each of those findings was significant enough to prompt a formal government response. None of them received one. The financial logic behind the airport project is not difficult to follow. 8 million tourists per year generates revenue at every level of the economy connected to the Sacred Valley. Airlines, hotels, transport operators, food and retail concessions and government tax receipts all benefit directly from higher visitor volumes. That money does not flow into archaeological research budgets or conservation programs. It flows through the same commercial and infrastructural networks that have shaped Peruvian development contracts for decades. The Odebrecht connection to the original Chinchero project, and the fact that the revived version moved from dormancy to fast-tracked approval in a matter of months, has drawn scrutiny from observers who note that the financial interests at stake have not changed, even if the legal landscape has. What researchers find particularly difficult to set aside is the timing. The airport project lay dormant for approximately 15 years, during which Machu Picchu was visited and studied at existing levels without any urgent push to dramatically increase access. Then, across a 5-year period from roughly 2020 to 2025, a series of scientific investigations revealed that the site is orders of magnitude more complex, more significant, and more fragile than the mainstream understanding had acknowledged. The underground infrastructure was mapped and found to be extraordinary. The geological placement was identified as deliberately precise. The genetic record of the population was found to reflect a deliberately assembled, ethnically diverse community drawn from across an empire. 12 previously unknown structures were found in restricted zones. And within weeks of a formal 20-year conservation commitment being signed, the project that would send 8 million people a year through the valley received government approval. The capacity report arrives in September 2026. The airport is scheduled to open in late 2027. By the time the official data confirming what independent researchers have already established reaches the public record, the construction timeline will be too far advanced for the findings to alter the outcome in any meaningful way. The decision, by all indications, was made before the evidence that was supposed to inform it was gathered. And the terraces at Chinchero, carrying 600 years of intact engineering knowledge in their stone and soil, will not be there to study once the runway is finished. What the scientific record now shows, when you lay it out in full, is that Machu Picchu is not the site that most people think they know. The popular understanding of the place, a royal estate built for an Inca emperor, a ceremonial retreat in the clouds, a spectacular but essentially straightforward example of pre-Columbian architecture, does not survive contact with the evidence that has accumulated over the past several years. The DNA findings, the LiDAR mapping, the geological modeling, and the engineering studies do not individually overturn that picture. Together, they demolish it. What they reveal instead is a site that was geologically selected with a precision that modern satellite technology is only now able to verify. A site where more than half of the actual construction is underground, invisible to the millions of people who have stood at that famous viewpoint and believed they were looking at Machu Picchu. A site populated by a deliberately assembled community drawn from across the full geographic range of the Inca Empire, including people transported through some of the most punishing terrain in South America. A site containing at least 12 structures that nobody knew existed, located in areas that have been restricted from public and research access for decades. And a site whose astronomical alignments and water management systems function at a level of precision that engineers and scientists in the 21st century describe as remarkable by any standard, ancient or modern. The reasonable question that follows from all of this is a simple one. If researchers working between 2023 and 2025, using tools that did not exist a generation ago, were able to produce findings of this scale and significance, what remains to be found? The underground infrastructure that has been mapped so far represents a fraction of what the surrounding terrain likely contains. The 12 structures identified by the LiDAR survey were found in a limited area during a relatively short scanning operation. The DNA study covered 34 individuals. Machu Picchu is estimated to contain several hundred burial sites. The geological survey identified the fault line intersection beneath the main temple complex, but the broader landscape has not been subjected to the same level of analysis. Every line of investigation that has been opened in recent years has produced findings larger than expected. There is no obvious reason to assume that pattern would reverse if the research were allowed to continue at the depth it warrants. That is precisely what makes the current situation difficult to assess without some degree of unease. The scientific case for treating Machu Picchu as a site of exceptional and largely unexamined complexity has never been stronger. The case for slowing down, for protecting the surrounding valley, for allowing researchers the time and access to understand what is actually buried beneath that mountain, is supported by every serious piece of evidence that has been produced. And the response from the Peruvian government has been to approve an airport designed to bring 8 million visitors a year into the region on a construction timeline so compressed that the official study assessing whether it is even viable will not be completed until after the key decisions have already been locked in. Dr. Salazar's findings were published and produced no official response. Caramanica's LiDAR survey identified 12 unknown structures in restricted government-controlled zones and produced no official response. Menegat's geological modeling showed that the Inca had built their most sacred site on a seismically stable intersection point that required modern satellite technology to identify, and produced no official response. Researchers from multiple institutions across several countries have published assessments warning that mass tourism at the scale the airport would generate poses direct, measurable risks to the underground systems that have survived intact for 5 centuries. No official response. The pattern is notable not because silence is automatically suspicious, but because the findings in question are not fringe claims or contested interpretations. They are peer-reviewed results produced by credentialed researchers using established methodologies, published in accessible scientific literature. They describe a site that is more significant, more fragile, and more poorly understood than the official narrative has ever acknowledged. A government with a genuine interest in the long-term preservation of that site would have something to say about findings of that magnitude. The absence of any engagement at all is a choice, and it is worth treating it as one. What is buried beneath Machu Picchu, in the restricted zones, in the unexcavated slopes, in the sections of the underground infrastructure that have not yet been mapped, remains unknown. The research conducted so far has been enough to establish that the answers, when they come, are unlikely to be small. Every instrument pointed at that mountain has returned something unexpected. The capacity report due in September 2026 will confirm what independent researchers have already concluded about the valley's infrastructure limits. Whether that confirmation changes anything at the level of government policy is a separate question, and on current evidence, not an optimistic one. What is certain is that the window for careful, methodical, independent scientific investigation of one of the most complex and least understood archaeological sites on the planet is narrowing. The terraces at Chinchero, which carry in their intact structure 6 centuries of engineering knowledge directly relevant to understanding how Machu Picchu itself was built, will not survive the runway. The restricted zones where 12 structures were found have not been open to systematic research. The capacity study arrives after the approval. The airport opens in 2027. The discoveries made between 2023 and 2025 represent the beginning of a serious scientific reckoning with what Machu Picchu actually is. They are not a conclusion. They are an opening, a demonstration that the site contains far more than the conventional account allowed for, and that the tools now exist to investigate it properly. Whether that investigation is allowed to happen, at the pace and scale the evidence demands, before the infrastructure decisions of 2026 make parts of it permanently impossible, is a question that does not yet have an answer.